attention. My name is Katie Parrish, Editorial Director of MCM Group and your host for today's conference. If you have follow-up questions, comments, ideas, or suggestions after today's event, please feel free to contact me at the phone number or email on the screen. MCM Group would like to extend a special thank you to today's sponsor, Serious Labs, Inc. Serious Labs develops simulator and game-based training systems for jobs in the global construction, mining, and oil and gas industries. The company combines instructional design, game mechanics, and simulation technologies to challenge trainees through realistic training missions that demand real-time, consequence-based decisions. Learn more at SeriousLabs.com. When safety was first introduced in 2007, our mission was to bring lifting equipment users and operators presentations and information on to raise safety awareness, introduce best practices, and bring compliance awareness to the construction, rental, and industrial markets. Topics are selected to help provide clarification, unify industry efforts, and help save the lives of equipment operators and workers on the ground. Today's presenter is Andrew Czarnietzki of Serious Labs. Andrew is a technical artist and game designer with more than 10 years of experience. He's one of the original founders of Serious Labs and has worked on industrial training projects covering a wide range of construction, mining, and oil field equipment. In this presentation, Andrew will talk about the process that went into developing the game's new job site safety orientation game, Life Rules. If you have questions for Andrew during the presentation, please type them into the question box on your screen. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. Additionally, this is being recorded and can be accessed this week on safetyconference.com and the MCM Group YouTube channel. Addresses for both will be shown again at the end of the presentation. Note that there may be some video during the presentation, and if you have trouble seeing the videos, don't worry, as Andrew will pause the screen during the most significant portions of the video to discuss them. I'm going to pass the controls over to Andrew. Oops, we're not at the end yet. And you can get ready whenever you're started. You can get started whenever you're ready.
Alrighty. First off, is my screen shared? Does this work?
It's all good. We can see you.
Excellent. So, hello everybody. I'm Andrew Czarnietzki and game designer with Serious Labs. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about our serious game development process and really kind of looking at how we take an initial concept, how we break it down, how we turn those pieces into game mechanics, how we prototype those mechanics, and ultimately end up with a serious game for training. So just a little bit of backstory for Serious Labs and where we came from. So we started with simulator training. We've done simulators for wheel tractor scrapers, front-end loaders, mining equipment, drilling rigs, aerial work platforms. So we've done quite a bit of various high-stakes equipment training through simulators. Just showing a couple samples of products we've worked on here. Our focus has always been through these simulators on engaging training. We've noticed that the more engaged someone is, the more effective the training is. And more effective the training, the better retention, the more people are aware, and it's just better training overall. And we found that simulators are good. People really get into them. They engage very well. I prefer a simulator to kind of very static PowerPoint style presentations. But we found that the more fun people are having, the more engaged, and therefore the better the training. And we got into looking at adding game mechanics and thinking about these less as simulators and more as serious games. And it's actually where our name changed from 3D Interactive to Serious Labs. So, not quite ready for that previous. So we believe that pretty much any topic can be expressed into game mechanics. So any topic can be expressed as a serious game. And we've demonstrated this with forklifts, mining equipment, safety procedures, lease site orientation, and are really applying this to pretty much all of our products going forward. And I want to give you a fairly detailed case study on one of our products called Life Rules. So Life Rules started as a mandate to create an online training course based around the idea of sort of life rules. And life rules are the life-saving rules, life-saving actions, zero tolerance rules, basically the same sort of 8 to 12 rules that all these major companies have, and there's a generally large amount of overlap. So here's kind of a sample of just 4, and you can already see that very common rules: always have a work permit, always follow the proper procedure when working at height or in a confined space. These are been joked as kind of the you breach any of these, you're instantly fired rules, and they're part of kind of the common orientation for pretty much all the major oil and gas construction companies, etc. And they're also a course that people dread. It's apparently quite dry, quite boring, very common sense for a lot of these things, and people have to take it a lot. Any time you start work with these companies, it's part of the general orientation. And so our mandate was, can we make a training course on life rules? And we'd previously done a life rules training course for Enbridge, so we had a pretty good understanding of the subject matter, although we followed a very standard e-learning model for that, and it was okay. Part of the issue is just the rules tend to be fairly dry and pedantic, and even for all the cool content we brought to the original one, I noticed that people still, their eyes just kind of glaze over and they just sort of stop caring. So it was an interesting product, but I don't feel it was overly successful. So just some samples from the first Enbridge product. So the big question for us was, how can we communicate this content in a way that is stickier, the way that has better retention, that actually gets people to pay attention more? How can we make this more engaging? And so we started with our core philosophy, and the core philosophy is that anything we do at Serious Labs has to be both fun and interactive. And sure, you have things that are not interactive but fun, like Hollywood movies, and you have things that are interactive but not fun, like exams or other various things. And you can use these in training, and they could potentially be good for effective training, but we've really found that when you mix the two together, that's where you have the most effective training and also the most efficient. We can build a fun and interactive thing that teaches a concept far easier than making a Hollywood production quality movie that communicates something, and even then people probably glaze over. So fun and interactive are kind of the key starting pieces. And it's interesting how we kind of organically grew into that. With the simulators, we found that, hey, people have fun with these simulators. And by adding game mechanics and game elements, we've noticed much more fun and therefore way better engagement, way better retention. So how can we make life rules fun? Because our original product was interactive, wasn't really fun, and generally very boring pedantic procedures are kind of the antithesis of fun. So we started with some initial brainstorming, and if you look at these life rules, they're all about kind of, you have to do X before you do Y. You have to have a work permit before you go and do work. You have to follow this procedure before you do something else. And so we really kind of took a look at what these rules are and ended up with, okay, they're very much following a linear step of procedure. We also looked at who our target audience is, and in this case, corporate customers here, very limited access to processing power. This isn't the new Xbox. And you also have a very wide range of experience for the potential trainees. We also looked at a lot of games that have already kind of looked at some of these pieces. And so games that deal with following a linear series of you have to do A before you do B, but do it in a way that's fun. So we looked at games such as this current one on screen, Portal. The Stanley Parable is a bit of an avant-garde approach to it. Interesting game. Bastion. And just a lot of these general ideas of how do games communicate these points of following procedure, going from point A to point B, as well as how do these games provide an interface to interact with this. And our discussions very quickly started to hone in on some key behaviors borrowed from role-playing games, RPGs, and puzzle games. And one thing we really liked about, say, this particular game right here, Bastion, is the idea of sort of this isometric camera, the fact it works very well on a tablet. Like it's pretty easy for people to get involved and play it. You don't have to have a lot of gaming experience. You don't have to be looking around. We also like the idea of the turn-based aspect for puzzle games. You click A and you don't have to immediately like move or do anything in a certain period of time. It's all about action, look at the consequences of the action, other action. So kind of some sort of isometric, so the sort of fixed grid camera idea, isometric puzzle game, RPG elements. That's kind of where we started. One of the issues, though, is we still had, here we have a puzzle game. Come on, there. Yeah, this sort of idea for graphics. One of the issues, though, when we started looking at the game, so we had a sort of a style, an idea, what we want to do, but you're still ultimately requiring people to go through procedures, point A to point B, and role-playing games tend to focus on story, and you know what, the story of a guy putting on the right equipment and then going to work is actually kind of boring. So we had an idea for style, but we really then started thinking about what are the mechanics? How does this game actually work? And mechanics are the core behaviors through which a player interacts with the game. And for us, the mechanics are really, really interesting because mechanics are central to the game's fun and engagement. And for us, that means they also have to be central to the learning outcomes and learning objectives. If this were a purely entertainment-based game, it's the mechanics just have to be as fun as possible. But for us, they have to specifically relate to the learning. We want people to have fun playing the game, but in the process also learn a very serious concept. And so we looked at how we could map mechanics onto this. And just following procedure directly is kind of boring. So how do we make a game around this? Why would anyone want to follow procedure? And after a bunch of discussion, well, you want to follow procedure because of safety, because of efficiency, and because of accomplishment. You want to get the job done and make money doing it. So safety in games usually means not dying or avoiding some sort of consequence, and that's a very important piece for the life rules. If you fail to do any of these things, the results can be quite dramatic, but that's secondary. We want something about playing the game, not about failing at the game. So the other piece that really stood out was efficiency and accomplishment. If we challenge the players to solve puzzles based on efficiency, then to solve that puzzle, they'd have to understand the procedure, and it's less about following procedure, and it's more about leveraging that procedure to actually win. And so ideally, we could create a setup where the player would have to realize, oh, to win this puzzle, I need a work permit, and I got to get that work permit before I get the protective equipment because that's a little more efficient, and then if I do this, and that's the realization, that's the heart of what we're trying to achieve on this. We want that player to go, to do this, I need a work permit. That is far better training than me just telling some guy, look, before you do work, have a work permit. They're like, nah, whatever. But by having them realize it, that's where kind of the heart of this learning is. So we then looked at an idea, if we had this sort of grid-based game, not unlike the example that I have on screen, and we had, say, a turn-based system, so you move by turns, then efficiency is accomplishing some goal in the fewest moves. And if you do it in the fewest moves, then, hey, we have a nice, clean grading system. We can kind of go, if you solve it in 15 moves, that's gold, 20 moves silver, 30 moves bronze. We have a nice way to quantify it, kind of a nice way to map efficiency onto these procedures. So that's kind of the core mechanic for the game. And we drafted a few ideas out on paper, and it was kind of interesting, but we found that, you know what, the solutions are way too obvious. It's still just A, B, C, D. It's just kind of connecting the dots. So how do we make this work? And we started looking at the idea of how to map challenge onto this. And challenge is all about choice. So first, if you make the wrong choice, there should be consequences. And in our case, that's pretty easy. You don't lock out the power supply, your little stickman gets electrocuted or something along that. So we have the big dramatic choices fairly easily, but what about subtle choices, choices that aren't life or death? And how do you add a challenge on this? And we want something that's not immediately obvious. And this is where we took a look at the traveling salesman problem, that idea that if you have multiple cities, what's the most efficient route for someone to get through it? This is a famous problem in mathematics, and it's a very, very surprisingly difficult problem to solve. But it's also fairly easy to verify, and it naturally leads to a gradient of partial solutions. So it's quite easy to have a route that works, might not be the best route, but it's better than a lot of other routes. And it's interesting, a little bit of human psychology. We're quite adept at solving these sort of problems, not perfectly, not finding the optimal solution, but doing okay at them. You look at certain things that would be very hard to set up in a computer, and we're like, oh, yeah, we can get through it and do it well enough for day-to-day life. And so could we use some of that same sort of feeling, that idea that, yeah, you can get through it, but you have to actually really work at it to do better? Could we map that traveling salesman problem to our life rules? And that led to a couple of big ideas. For example, multiple routes. You can't just go to point A, point B. You're not walking through a hallway. You have to kind of choose how to navigate around that area. Choice between objects. So where possible within the rules, but for example, is it more efficient in one level to get the work permit first or get the equipment first? Also, the idea of like redundant equipment. Yeah, you can walk over there and get a second hard hat, but it doesn't have any value. So you have to choose which hard hat to get first and make the choice not to try and pick up both. I will throw out, though, there's a bit of a caveat on that, because we always want to make sure that everything we do in the game is consistent with the rules and the procedures. So even though we want to have as much choice as possible, the core restriction we added to the game is that the player must never be able to succeed by breaching or taking a shortcut or anything along that line. So a little bit of choice helped, but still didn't quite work. You're still going from A, B, C to a goal and being done. So we also looked at multiple goal objects, breaking that up. So instead of getting to an end goal, you get to multiple goals, and that led to our idea of work tokens and pickups for this sort of thing, abstracting that idea of work, because at the end of the day, this is orientation. It doesn't matter if this is for an electrician or a pipe fitter or whomever. We also looked at hiding objects and kind of controlling the flow. So you have to get the work permit in order to learn about what the actual work is. And then things like moving parts. Is there any way we can have stuff change as you play? And this led naturally into, say, like the supervisors or other characters, because for several of the rules you have to talk to a supervisor, and hey, if he moves around, then the most efficient route to get to him and get to the work and get to the equipment is no longer obvious. So at this point we had a fairly solid design. We understood what we want to do. We want to follow these procedures, but do it in the most efficient way possible on this grid-based game with multiple choices, so there's not an immediately obvious solution. We started initially just with a lot of paper drawings, notes and little ideas here, plotting things out on graph paper, and just counting the moves. Okay, I can do that one in 30 moves, and this other choice makes it 20 moves, and that actually seems like we have enough choice. And we really considered a lot of these sort of questions just simply on paper first. That validated some of our assumptions and got us to the point of doing an actual prototype. And prototypes are key. Prototypes are the most important part of our development process. So with this idea, this kind of proposal, these various notes, we decided to enter into the prototyping phase. And so for us, a prototype is what we can accomplish during a fixed period of time, generally 2 weeks. Prototypes also have a series of goals, usually in the form of questions. Prototypes are really good because they allow us to fail fast. If an idea doesn't work, we want to know that before we invest any time and energy into it. And we also are able to identify things that work well. If you find something that works well in a prototype, you can take that and build it out and make that a key component as opposed to some little tertiary detail. And I could speak all day about prototypes and iterative design, but suffice to say that when dealing with unknowns, prototypes are an excellent way to make sure that what we're building actually makes sense. So for life rules in particular, as we decided to prototype this, we started with a couple of these goal questions. And some were more technical, but some of the highlights here are, can we make a grid-based movement system? So how does the player actually navigate around one of these little maps? Is the system intuitive and engaging? Does it actually make sense to people who are seasoned veterans of gaming and who've never played a video game before in their life? Does it make sense on tablet and on web player PC? We also looked at, can we build our initial level concepts with this grid-based system? So these quick little sketches, can we map that into this game? Do people find the solutions too easy or too hard? really difficult to test that one on paper, so we actually need to watch people play this and see if this makes sense. How long does it take players to experience a typical scenario? One of the risks to this is if it's going to take 6 hours for someone to consume this course, it just doesn't make sense in this context. And then for the gold, silver, bronze rating, does that actually work in practice? And how do players react to it? Is that something they appreciate? Is that something that encourages them to find the most efficient way, or is it something that gets in the way and that they resent? So what about the life rule procedures, the core learning? Does it make sense to follow these procedures in this abstracted grid environment? More importantly, do the players understand what we're trying to communicate? Do they get that that's a work token and you have to have a work permit before you can go collect your virtual work? And is there a clear and intuitive understanding of consequences? Does it make sense if you enter into that danger zone and get electrocuted because you didn't have the right procedure? And then what about the aesthetics? And how does this game look? And that's one of the things that we have to answer now, the prototype. And we did a lot of looking, and one thing that's common to all these rules is they have these stickmen icons, the same stickmen that are getting electrocuted and crushed and are common throughout all industry. And so the idea is, could we use this stickman graphic as kind of our character? Because it allows us to demonstrate all of these consequences, but it's also not too graphic. If we had like a very human character, you don't want to show him being electrocuted and run over and crushed. But if you have a stickman, it's kind of fun and cartoony, but it also does demonstrate there's a serious consequence here, and it relates pretty cleanly to warning signs and kind of a common aesthetic found through industry. So we want to build that and test that during this prototype. And so the first stage prototype actually came together quite well. We ended up, this is a screenshot from it, so the UI is very simple with actions, work permits, and that. That's probably the biggest difference to what the final game looks like. I'm actually surprised how similar they still look. But we had a prototype, and then we got people to play it. The movement system seemed clear. People were able to navigate around the grid. People actually really seemed to enjoy just moving the stickmen around the grid, much more so than we originally expected. So part of the fun to this game is just simply controlling your character. That actually worked really well. Some of the initial concept levels, such as the one pictured, actually they fit, they worked well. People were able to complete them in a relatively short amount of time, and more interestingly, players tended to be about 70% efficient without really trying. So most people, they managed to get through it, would get a silver, maybe a bronze, depending on if they really were just kind of lost and wandering around. And then for players that actually really tried, especially when you put a goal to it, like the gold, silver, bronze, well, pretty much anyone can get 100%, but you have to try. And so we have this really nice, you can consume the course, but you can also be challenged by the course and therefore really start thinking about the learning in that. And the idea of the grading actually fit very naturally and worked quite well. So that was a pretty good validation of what we have. And it was really quite interesting to see how people went through this. So even with kind of a simple little stylized icon like the work permit there, you ended up having people go, okay, I need to get the work permit first, and then I've got to get the fall protection on this one so I can cross that hazard, and this is great. And because this is an orientation course, even just them linking the terminology, just going, I need to get a work permit first. That's one of the central learning objectives to this exercise. We're not teaching someone how to operate a piece of equipment or drive or follow some really detailed procedure. We just want them to know, get a work permit, lock out power. So if they can start internalizing those details, that's excellent. And overall, you know what? It seemed to work out fairly well. Players, it was fairly clear to the players. They understood what they had to do. They understood what the objects were with the correct terminology. They got the idea of the consequences, so the failure animations, the stickmen, and that piece seemed to work well. People immediately recognize him as the bathroom sign guy or the warning sign guy, and he's kind of fun to watch walk around, and we were able to brutalize him fairly well. So all of that actually worked pretty good, even if some of it wasn't really implemented in the prototype. So the "you have died" is not nearly as dramatic as watching him actually fall off and have a little sound effect, but that actually worked and went pretty good. So great, we have a prototype. We validated the prototype, answered a bunch of the questions, and the business decision was made to move life rules into production. So how do you move a prototype into production? And there's a bunch of the boring technical cleanup and project management and that sort of stuff. But where I come in on the design side, our focus was really how do we make sure that this little proof of concept maps to the instructional design for the entire course. And we had quite a bit of brainstorming and discussion. The image on screen right now, this is our whiteboard basically linking up all the various ideas and where we wanted to take the prototype. What could work, what couldn't work, what are various things we'll need to do. So we ended up creating basically a backlog of everything we want to do for this. At the same time, we also took our rules and started to break these things down. So for our canonical list of rules, we need a list of all the life rules that we want featured in this game. And we want our list to include everything for any potential customer. Because we're building this on spec, we don't have like Halliburton's rules or Shell's rules. We want to be able to have this, everything's included, and if we need to customize it for a particular customer, we can pare it down. We can, okay, you know what, those guys don't actually use this rule, so we'll just drop that, but we still have the game. We don't want to be ever in a position of scrambling and having to add something after the fact and kind of go, oh, right, we didn't really consider this rule, and that becomes a deal breaker trying to publish or sell this. So we took and aggregated all of these rules from everywhere we could find them, and there's a staggering amount of overlap, a couple of unique ones, but for the most part they line up fairly well. Started with kind of these 18 parent rules, and we managed to condense and work that down to 13, I think is the final count. We also had the sub-rules, the bullet points, kind of associated for each one. And what we did is we went and put this up on the whiteboard. I'm a big fan of analog everything, although looking at that whiteboard still makes my wrist cramp a little bit. But we had all of these rules on the whiteboard, and then we went through and we started to prioritize these. We also started to annotate them to whether or not they're represented in the game currently or could be. And on this image here, that was initially with the little green dots and green circles. So some ideas like the safe work permit, bang, that works really well. Even in the very first stage prototype, we have players going, I need to get a work permit to do work. That's solved, perfect. And it's core through all the levels. The game does that very well. But then we had other ones where, like, do not proceed till authorized safe. And it's like, okay, how do we communicate some of these things? And so even if we didn't have specific mechanics, we made note that these are ones that we could work into our grid model and we could fit this into our game. But there is a number of ones that didn't really fit. For example, how do you stop someone from driving drunk? And that's not really something easy to communicate in our fewest moves walk through a grid. And so we highlighted all of these ones that are kind of weak or poorly represented, the orange dots for those of you looking at this. A lot of it had to do with like journey management and seatbelts driving, and really started to look at what do we need to make sure those are represented. And this is where, if this was an entertainment game, that previous whiteboard image would be all that really matters. What do we want to do with this game? What are the cool things to add next? What will make this a better game? But because we're doing this for learning, and because we realized, oh, we actually have quite a few holes, our design focus really had to lock down and cover all the points we need to communicate inside the game, and not just the easy ones, not just the fun ones. And so each of these points we have to identify, implement, prototype, and cover. And so how do we deal with some of these ones that are weak? The ones that are fun and easy and work, they're nothing. How do we deal with the ones that are weak? And we looked at, say, specific mechanics. So for example, the idea of you have to verify that the power is locked out. Well, we originally just had, okay, we got to tell the user this, maybe have a cutscene or something, but it's like, wait a sec, we can actually build a level around this where the power shuts off and then the player has to go talk to another character in order to actually verify that the power is off. This now makes sense. This works. We've tested this, and now this is a rule that goes from being weakly represented to now actually strongly represented in the game. That works great. We then looked at user interface. So instead of that initial kind of rough pop-up, what can we do with the information on screen to really link back to the rules, to communicate the text clearly, to use the actual text and the correct terminology? And so we started with, for example, these pop-ups. So when you pick up a rule, so first time you get a work permit or first time you get PPE, protective equipment, it brings up this pop-up and links back to the rule explicitly. Now, this work, we did have to be a bit careful because a pop-up like this does disrupt the game. And to be honest, it does make the game less fun. But at the same time, we want to make it so it doesn't turn anyone off of the game, but still communicates that information cleanly and links back. We also looked at things like having this passive information on the bottom. So every time you pick up a work permit, we cycle new text relating to a work permit or relating to personal protective equipment. So even though it's fairly passive, we just want to always have that terminology, always have those rules in front of the player. We also looked at having these icons on the side. So when you get a piece of protective equipment, it highlights that little icon. Those icons are always visible. And those icons kind of grow and change, like they're progressively more highlighted as you go through. So it actually was kind of a neat way to demonstrate how far you have come in the game and what rules you've been exposed to. But ultimately, it's just another way for us to keep these icons in front of the user and keep them thinking about these rules as they play the game. So the user interface helped, the specific mechanics helped. We managed to get about 70–80% of all the major points covered within the game. Certainly all of the high priority ones, but there's still areas that were soft. And even then, there's some areas where people were interpreting them different than we wanted. So we wanted a way to communicate what these rules are and especially communicate the rules that are kind of weakly represented. And so that's where we got into our idea of cutscenes. So sandwiched between a bunch of these levels, we have these little kind of animated warning sign videos where we can specifically speak out a rule. For example, this one would be always lock out a power supply before doing work on high energy systems or something to that point. So by having these little cutscenes, we're able to represent the rules that are otherwise kind of missing, and we're also able to reinforce the rules that are actually in the game and give them proper verbiage. And from like the way people learn, here's another, like them interacting and them seeing and them experiencing, we feel is the best way to learn. But you know what, you pair that with also telling them, you pair that with them reading information about that, and you're going to have a better experience overall. So this allowed us to communicate some of these points from either a different perspective or even just set the stage in context. So after you see this little cutscene about isolate energy, and then you're put into a level with little transformers and stuff, like I guess these little guys here, you'll see more of that shortly. People go, I need to lock out that high energy system, and are considering the terminology and considering the consequences and such like that. So cutscenes, fairly important. And then the other issue is we still have these ones that are soft, and sure they're represented with a cutscene, but they're really, we don't want anything to be underrepresented in the game. And so that led to the final idea, which was the concept of quizzes. So we have these quizzes inside the game, and they're a little bit of a misnomer because technically they're not a knowledge check. We're not asking something that the player has been previously taught. We're also, if it was a knowledge check, it's too recent. You can't tell someone something and then ask them immediately after. It's too recent. What they are, though, is they're a teaching tool. So anyone should be able to figure out the correct answer just by kind of considering the context, considering the rules and kind of the idea. And they're really just common sense. But we want people to have this little story and consider the answer. So we can't easily show something like your coworker failed to verify power, or your supervisor is driving drunk and you have to tell them to stop. We can't really work that into the game mechanics, but we can tell these stories through these quizzes. And so a couple things on the design of the quizzes. One is we didn't want to break them from the game. So even though this is a quiz, you're still interacting by moving your character on the grid and choosing a door. So we don't want to totally disconnect the system. The other thing is, because it's a different type of gameplay, we actually noticed that people actually kind of like the quizzes. It was a bit of a virtual palate cleanser. After they do a quiz, then they're like really looking forward to that next level, and that next level feels fresh all of a sudden. So it really helped kind of even out the experience of the game, which otherwise would just be kind of a fairly steady progression of difficulty and complexity. So we're actually quite happy with how the quizzes ended up turning out. And because of the quizzes, it allows us to make sure that anything that's not represented in the game is represented through a quiz, and everything then is still represented through through cutscenes. And that's how we got that. So those are kind of the key pieces we had to build after the fact, and for each of those we prototyped them, tested them. The quizzes we were especially concerned about. We did a quick implementation, got a bunch of people to play through, test it, and fairly immediately it's like, okay, that model works, we can incorporate that into the game. In terms of building out the rest of the game is fairly easy. We need cooler art assets, more detail, more pieces. Really, once you actually know what you're building and you've validated what you're building through prototypes, the rest becomes fairly trivial. We did want to be a little careful though, so anything we built that's specific and new, we want to make sure serves the learning. So the one big feature to this game that you can't really see in a presentation like this is the narrator. We really wanted to make sure that the narrator is used to communicate terminology, communicate the rules, and be more than just an element of fun. We also, for what we've been calling the greeblies, so things like our little desk and shelves and the tower stations and all this, they add visual interest and they look cool, but ultimately they're about setting the context. So on this level here, you see that little transformer and you kind of, okay, I'm dealing with high voltage and high energy. You see something with a crane and it's like, okay, I'm dealing with overhead hazards and the shadow of doom. I have pipes and tanks and I could be dealing with fluids or gases or those sort of pieces. And so we really want kind of those extra little art assets to link back and set the stage so people are in the right headspace as they take the course. So basically, as we built anything, you have that idea of how does it serve the learning, and then does this improve clarity and improve fun? But those are fairly low priorities compared to the learning side. And like you look at the quizzes, arguably they make the game a worse game, but they make it a far better training tool. So that's pretty much the history for this Life Rules game. We start with a problem, try and understand what's the learning for this problem, how can we map that into game mechanics that actually make sense, how can we kind of figure out what we want to do on paper by whatever, how do we prototype that, and then based on the prototype, how do we build it out, and as we build it out, we just always be aware of what our end goal is. And it's a bit different from pure entertainment, but I find by keeping kind of those design constraints in mind, we can have a product that's hopefully fun to play, but also offers far better real training in industry to real people. And that's pretty much our Life Rules game. The only other thing that I'd like to add is, as part of this product, what we're doing is we've planned a formal study for early 2015, and the goal is to directly compare the existing training to the training via this game. And we're going to be looking at measuring retention over a period of time after for as hopefully a large sample size as we can get. And I'm really quite curious as to the results. We've seen a lot of anecdotal evidence already with the Life Rules game. We've validated it with industry representatives and customers and made sure everything we're doing kind of lines up to their expectations. But I'm really quite interested to see the actual numbers that come out of this. And I guess that's the final piece of anything we build, we want to validate and test. Whether it's, does that prototype make sense to the first playtester who sees it, all the way to, does this course actually offer valid training? And based on that, we have better learning internally, and we can apply it to our next product and our next products and so on. So that's it. That's our Life Rules game, and hopefully you can see how that lines up to our philosophy of fun, interactive training. And that's all I have. So are we good for questions?
Yes, Andrew, thank you very much. That was great. We do have a few questions here. If you have some questions, please type them in the question box, and we'll get to those in a second. First of all, can employers change the rules for different departments? So say there's specific job site and construction. They want the rules for the game to be applied to that market, to that industry. Can they be changed to industrial, or is that a totally different program?
Potentially. So the way we built this is it's all extraordinarily modular. Our expectation is we will have probably our generic version, but I fully expect there to be a Company X version which has their specific language in it, because that language is also tied to legal requirements. So I fully expect we will customize some of these pieces, and it makes sense for us to actually customize to some company and have like the audio and all these other pieces match. In theory, it would be possible to make it have kind of sub-modularity, and that maybe you have your industrial group, maybe you have your construction group, and it could be set up so potentially even the end user could make things. But for the most part, if you look at how the rules are actually taught, here are our 10 rules, and even if you never deal with confined spaces or atmospheric gas testing, you're still told those. So I think in the spirit of the life rules, we want to cover all 10 or all 12, 13, and only really customize it if we need to link to some specific company's legal requirements to say this phrasing.
Okay. And when you developed those rules, did you adopt any type of like different OSHA regs or other applicable standards? Where did the rules come from?
So they're an aggregate of the rules currently being taught by, I think we had like 10 input companies into this, and so we used as a basis like the Halliburton rules, the Shell rules, Plains Energy, PCL. So all of these various companies, we used those as a basis and isolated the pieces that overlap and kind of collected those, and then for the parts that were unique, we made sure to represent those. We didn't look specifically at OSHA, though we did look at I can't remember which group, but there's a particular oil and gas one that's really big with ESSO that was kind of everything in there has to be at least that. And so we are cognizant about making sure what we're teaching is relevant to standards and regulation.
Okay. Is this game similar, I know you and I had talked about this, but is this game similar to the United Rentals training program that they had launched recently, or how does that differ from this? Yeah,
so that's a different product. That's happening on the other side of the office, so I can't really speak to that in a ton of detail. That course, so that one has much more content in it. So where this is you could play through the whole game in about half an hour, and it's very much these very specific orientation level, always have a work permit before doing work. With that one, it's much more detailed onto different types of procedures relating to rough terrain, forklifts, or how to operate a scissor lift, or all these various pieces. So it's much, much more in depth. So it's a longer course, has a lot more linear content similar to our cutscenes, and then it still has game elements built in. And those game elements are really key to driving engagement and having people interact with this and just kind of apply some of that learning from the course. So I guess the big difference is for the life rules here, the learning is through playing, where on the United Rentals one, it's more of a cementing and applying that learning. I do know, though, that the way the game elements were built follow exactly the same model. They start with learning objectives, then they brainstorm, discuss. I think they actually game jammed, where you have a bunch of little test ideas, then turn that into a prototype, and then that prototype entered into production, and then as they build it, they are always cognizant about how are we communicating those learning objectives.
Okay. Is there any sort of data that kind of backs up how well this type of learning is, how well people learn this in this method?
Yes, I don't have any on hand. I know that we've looked at a bunch of studies. There's a bunch of papers out on this. We've also a whole ton of anecdotal evidence. Yeah, I might be able to get some from Annette or Wade. I know that there are some papers and pieces on it, but that's one of the reasons why we are funding our own study space specifically around the life rules piece, where, for example, like the forklift ones, we're working very closely with subject matter experts, and we know that what we're building is improving training and et cetera. This one here is less of a customer design and more of our design. So this is a very pure demonstration of our philosophy. And while we're quite confident in that because of our experience, because of what we've seen, how our products have worked, and from our customers' experience and all these pieces, this one we definitely want to prove out. And so I'm quite interested to see what we're going to get out of that in 2015.
Okay, super. And then the last question is, this is more general construction rules. Are there any that are specific to forklifts or crane operator training? Are you looking at simulation software for specific equipment?
So we have actual simulators, like I can take you downstairs and we could drive around a Caterpillar loader, or I could show you how to operate a Joy continuous miner. So we have full-on competency pieces, and then on the game side, we can map that very nicely. So for the underground mining, we've talked about moving through a mine environment from sort of an evacuation training game or inspecting a vehicle game. So you could potentially map those on quite neatly. In terms of these rules, so these rules are very much the general 10 rules that you have for all these large construction and oil field companies. But what we're interested in is we could potentially map things like Witness onto the same sort of grid-based platform. So we might see a derivative of life rules that focuses on hazardous materials. We could like if there was a specific training need and it goes, you know what, it's all about procedure and these kind of human-level procedures such as inspecting vehicles, and we could use some of the same mechanics for life rules, there's no reason we couldn't build a life rules variant. At the same time, I think the idea is, what are we trying to teach, and what type of game design, what type of mechanics best serve that learning? So if I'm trying to teach someone how to become an expert operator on a stubbing machine, then a simulator makes much more sense than this little grid-based tablet game. However, if I'm trying to teach them about general top 10 procedures, then this is a excellent medium for doing so.
Okay, great. I think those are all the questions that we have today. Unless someone else has something in the next 30 seconds or so, we'll wrap this up here. But I want to say thank you all for attending today. For a rebroadcast of this presentation, the websites that it'll be located on are safetyconference.com, liftandaccess.com, and our YouTube channel /MaxCapMedia. Special thanks again to our sponsor, Serious Labs, and Andrew Czarnietzki. If you have any questions or comments, please let us know, and we'll be happy to answer those best we can. Thank you again. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.